Clara Whitmore pressed her right arm against her ribs and did not make a sound. Not when the stagecoach hit the rut outside Billings. Not when the wheel dropped into that second hole and every passenger lurched sideways and the woman beside her grabbed her arm for balance and Clara's vision went white at the edges. Not even then. She had learned across 3 years of marriage to Thomas Whitmore that sound invited attention and attention invited worse. So she pressed her arm harder and she breathed through her teeth and she looked out the window at Montana like it owed her something. If you have ever loved a woman who survived by going silent, this story is for you. Stay with me until the very end, and drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story has traveled. Subscribe to this channel and hit that bell because every part of Clara's story is coming, and you do not want to miss a single word of what this man did next. The stagecoach from Billings to Copper Creek ran twice a week, and on the Thursday it carried Clara Whitmore. It was 47 minutes late and smelled like wet wool and tobacco, and the particular kind of exhaustion that settles into men who have been traveling too long. Clara had been traveling for 11 days. She had stopped counting the hours somewhere in Illinois. She had one trunk. It held 4 dresses, her father's law books. 2 of them, the ones she had managed to grab before Gerald Whitmore's man arrived at the Philadelphia boarding house to collect what he called the family's property. A change of underclothes, a wool nightgown, and a folded letter from the Copper Creek matrimonial agency, confirming her arrangement with one Ethan Calloway widower rancher, age 38, said to be a man of steady character and reliable income. She had read that letter 9 times across 11 days. She was not reading it for reassurance. She was reading it the way a person reads a contract before they sign something they cannot undo. The stagecoach stopped. Clara heard the driver call out Copper Creek, and she straightened her back and immediately regretted it. The pain moved through her right side like a hot wire ribs, 3, 4, and 5, the ones the agency doctor in Philadelphia had wrapped before she boarded the first train west. He had not asked her how she got them. She had not told him. He had wrapped them tight, charged her 75 cents, and said to rest. She had not rested. There was no rest available to her. She gathered her traveling bag from the rack above her head, carefully right arm pinned to her side, left arm reaching slowly, and waited for the 2 men across from her to exit first. They did not offer assistance. She had not expected them to. The step down from the coach was the problem. It always was. 3 steps steep, no railing on the left side, and the ground in Copper Creek was uneven dried mud from a recent rain gone hard and ridged. Clara stood at the top of those steps and calculated the angle, the drop, the exact placement of her right foot, the way she would need to brace, ma'am. She looked down. He was standing at the base of the steps, not reaching up, not grabbing, not assuming, just standing positioned so that if she needed something to steady herself against, he was there. His hat was off. He held it at his side. He was taller than she had expected from the single brief letter he had sent. She had built some picture of him from words like steady and quiet land and good water, and his face was the face of a man who spent his days outside and did not apologize for it. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I'm Ethan Calloway." "Mr. Calloway," she said. She came down the steps. She managed all 3 without sound. She was very proud of herself for that. He watched her make those 3 steps the way a man watches something he is trying to understand without staring. She caught it, that brief flicker across his eyes, the small tightening at the corners there and gone. He had noticed something. She did not know what. She lifted her chin and looked at him straight. "The trunk is mine," she said. "The driver has it." "I'll get it," he said, and he put his hat back on and went to speak with the driver, and Clara stood on the uneven ground of Copper Creek's main street and looked at the town that was going to be her life. It was smaller than she'd hoped and larger than she'd feared. A general store, a livery, a bank building that looked newer than everything around it. A church with a crooked steeple, 2 saloons close enough together that their noise combined into one long argument. Women moved along the boardwalk. A boy chased a dog between 2 horses tied at a post. Somewhere a hammer was hitting something rhythmically unhurried like a man who had all day. Ethan came back with her trunk balanced on his shoulder like it weighed nothing. He set it into the back of the wagon, then came around to the passenger side. Again, he did not reach for her. He simply moved to the right position and waited. Clara put her hand on the wagon's side rail and stepped up. The wagon shifted as she settled onto the bench, and she controlled the reaction in her face, but her hand on the rail went white at the knuckle for just a moment. Ethan was already walking around to the driver's side. He did not see it. Or she thought he did not see it. He climbed up. He gathered the reins. He looked at the road ahead. "Town road's faster," he said, "but it's rough this time of year. Old Creek Road's longer by about 20 minutes. Smoother, though. Better drainage." Clara looked at the road that ran straight through Copper Creek and out the other side. She could see where it buckled near the bank building where the boards had been laid uneven over old ruts. "The longer road is fine," she said. He nodded once and turned the horses. They drove for a while in silence. Not uncomfortable silence, or not entirely. The kind of silence that happens between two strangers who are each trying to figure out the rules. Clara sat straight and kept her arm at her side and watched Montana. It was, she would admit, remarkable country. The sky was a color she did not have a name for in Philadelphia. The mountains in the distance were the kind of mountains you had to look at twice to believe. The land ran open in all directions, grass gone gold, this late in the season, scattered with sage cut through by a creek that caught the afternoon light. "How long were you traveling?" Ethan asked. 11 days, she said. "That's a long way." Yes. Another silence. He was not a man who filled silence with noise. She noticed that and filed it. "I wrote what I could in the letter," he said after a while. "Figured you'd have questions. You can ask them." "I have a few," she said. "Go ahead." "You have a hand who sleeps in the bunkhouse." "2 hands. Jeb and a younger man called Porter. There'll be no trouble to you." "The nearest town with a doctor." 12 miles. Doc Hartley. He comes out to the valley once a month, regular more if someone sends for him. "Church?" "Copper Creek Methodist. Services Sunday. You don't have to go." She looked at him at that. He was watching the road. "The letter from the agency said you were a man of faith," she said. "I am," he said. "I just don't think faith needs to be anyone else's obligation." Clara filed that too. "The house," she said. "The arrangement of it." He was quiet for a moment. "There are 2 bedrooms," he said. "Main one's been mine. Smaller one, it was my wife's sewing room. I've cleaned it out. Put in a proper bed dresser stand." He paused. "I had a bolt put on the inside of the door." Clara turned to look at him fully. He kept his eyes on the road. His jaw was set in the way of a man who has said what he means to say and is not going to unsay it or explain it further unless asked. She turned forward again. Thomas had never given her a bolt on any door. Thomas had considered locked doors a personal offense. "Thank you," she said. She meant it more than she had meant anything in a very long time. The Calloway Ranch sat at the end of a long approach road, cottonwoods on both sides, going to gold, and Clara's first sight of it was a low house, solid, well-kept, a barn behind it, in better repair than the house itself, which told her something about the man beside her. A kitchen garden on the south side, the last of the season in it. Fence lines straight and tight. A dog came off the porch at a run when it heard the wagon tail going, and Ethan said, "That's Hector. He'll bowl you over if you let him." "I've managed worse," Clara said. Ethan almost smiled. She caught the near edge of it. Inside the house, he showed her the kitchen, the main room, the small back room that was hers. The bed had a proper quilt on it, not a ranch hand's patchwork, but a real quilt, double wedding ring pattern, worn soft. She did not ask where it came from. The dresser had a pitcher and basin on it. The window looked east. The bolt was exactly what he'd said. Simple iron solid mounted on the doorframe at the right height. Clara put her hand on it, slid it closed, slid it open, closed again. Ethan said from the doorway, "I'll start supper. You rest if you need to." "I don't need to rest," she said. He looked at her. "All right," he said. But when she came to the kitchen 20 minutes later, she found that the highest shelf, the one above the iron stove, where another man might have stored the daily flour and coffee, had been reorganized. The things she'd need most were on the lowest 2 shelves. She looked at it. She looked at the high shelf, mostly empty now. She had not told him anything. She had not told him her ribs were broken. She had not told him she could not reach above her shoulder without pain that made her vision swim. She had simply made those 3 steps down from the coach, gotten into the wagon, and ridden the long, quiet road in silence. And he had rearranged his shelves. Clara stood in his kitchen and pressed her lips together and told herself she was not going to cry on the first day. She was not going to give this strange man the satisfaction of watching her come apart before she had even learned his routines. She made it to dinner without crying. Dinner was beans and cornbread and salt pork plain food, and Ethan set it on the table and pulled out her chair and sat down across from her, and they ate mostly without talking, but it was not a bad silence. Hector lay under the table and pressed his warm bulk against Clara's feet, and she let him. "The cornbread is good," she said. "There's a jar of honey if you want it." "I'm fine." He refilled her coffee without asking. She studied him across the table when she thought she could do it without being obvious. He had a direct quality, this man. Not rough, not imposing, direct. The kind of man who said what he meant and did not say much. His hands were rancher's hands, broad and scarred, but he used them gently. She watched him move the coffee pot, move the bread plate, push. Hector's nose away from the table with one quiet word, and she catalogued every motion like a woman who had learned that a man's small habits were more honest than anything he ever said aloud. Thomas had had beautiful manners at dinner tables where other people were watching. Thomas had had very different manners when they were alone. "Mr. Calloway," she said. "Ethan," he said. "Ethan." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "I want you to understand something." He waited. "I came here in good faith," she said. "I have no family to return to. I have no money beyond what the agency provided for travel. I am not a woman who has options, and I want you to understand that I know that. But I also want you to know that I am not without skills. My father was an attorney. I know land law. I can read a contract and find what's wrong with it. I kept the accounts for my previous household. I am not fragile." She had almost said my husband's household. She had caught herself in time. Ethan looked at her steadily for a long moment. "I never thought you were," he said. "Many men would. Many men are fools," he said matter-of-fact, and picked up his fork. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of the ranch starting up Ethan's boots in the kitchen, the creak of the back door, Hector's nails on the floorboards. The morning was dark still. She lay in the small bed under the double wedding ring quilt and listened to a man moving through a house without trying to be quiet, just not trying to be loud, and felt the difference between that and lying in the dark, listening for footsteps with her whole body tense as wire. Her ribs hurt. They would hurt for another several weeks. She had accepted that. She got up. She washed her face. She went to the kitchen. Ethan was at the stove. He looked over his shoulder when she came in. He had already made coffee. "You don't have to be up this early," he said. "I was awake," she said. He handed her a cup. She sat at the table and looked at the window, dark, still the faint gray beginning at the horizon. Hector came and put his head in her lap without invitation. She put her hand on his ears. "I want to know about the land dispute," she said. Ethan turned from the stove. "How did you hear about the land dispute?" "The woman at the general store," Clara said. "When you were loading supplies yesterday, she introduced herself, Ruth Harper. She mentioned Silas Pritchard and that he's been pressuring landowners in the valley." Ethan's jaw did the thing it did when he was thinking about what to say. "It's not your problem to worry about," he said. "You told me you needed someone who could read contracts." "I said I needed—" He stopped. He turned back to the stove. "I said that in the letter, yes. Then let me read what you have." He was quiet for a moment. Then he put the pan down and went to the main room, and she heard the sound of a drawer opening, papers being gathered. He came back and set a stack of documents on the table beside her coffee cup without a word. Clara pulled them toward her. She read while he cooked. She read carefully the way her father had taught her, not for what the words said, but for what they were arranged to make you miss. Pritchard's name was in 3 of the 5 documents, twice as a witness and once as a county land commissioner, which meant he had signed off on a survey that he had also been paid to witness, which was not legal in any territory that operated under anything resembling actual law. "This survey," she said, "the one dated July 1877. That's the one Pritchard's using to claim the east quarter of my land isn't mine. He witnessed it and co-signed it. That's a conflict of interest. The survey is voidable." Ethan turned around and looked at her. "Your boundary runs along the creek," Clara said. "Your original deed says following the natural course of Becker Creek as of the date of settlement. That creek has shifted. That happens. But it doesn't change your claim to the land east of the original course. Do you have anyone who remembers where the creek ran in 1871? "Old Herschel Doane," Ethan said slowly. "He homesteaded the valley before I came. He'd remember." "Then we need Herschel Doane's sworn statement," Clara said. "And we need to get this survey in front of the territorial land commissioner, not the county one. Pritchard has no authority over territorial submissions." Ethan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He looked at the document spread between them. He looked at her. "You said you knew land law," he said. "I did. I thought that was—" He paused, searching for words that weren't unkind. "You thought that was a woman trying to sound useful," Clara said. He had the honesty to not argue with that. "Somewhat," he said. "My father argued 3 land cases in Pennsylvania Circuit Court," she said. "I attended every session. I read every brief. I was 12 years old when I read my first property survey and told him where the surveyor had made an error." She folded her hands on the table. He was right, incidentally. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Something was shifting in his face, not quite respect, because respect was the wrong word, implying he had thought less of her before. Recognition, maybe, like finding something he had hoped might be there and had not quite let himself count on. "All right," he said. "All right," she agreed. She went back to reading. It was 2 days later that Ruth Harper came to the ranch with a jar of preserved plums and the particular energy of a woman who has been waiting for a reason to visit. She was 50, round-faced, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who ran her household and half the surrounding community with equal efficiency and made it look like kindness. Clara was hanging wash on the line when Ruth's wagon came up the road. She had managed the sheet just fine. It was the pillowcase that had done it, reaching for the high part of the line, her right arm going up too fast, and the pain that had come with it had been sharp enough that she'd stopped moving entirely for 3 seconds. Pillowcase hanging from her hand, breathing. She didn't know Ruth had seen it until Ruth climbed down from her wagon and walked to the line and took the pillowcase from her without comment and pinned it up herself. "High line's too high," Ruth said. "I keep telling Ethan to lower it. He's too tall, doesn't think about it." Clara looked at her. Ruth looked back with the expression of a woman who had seen things and kept her counsel, and was not under any circumstances going to make this moment into more than it needed to be. "Plums," Ruth said, and held out the jar. "From my summer crop. I put up too many." Clara took the jar. "Thank you. I'll have coffee if you're offering." Clara made coffee. They sat at Ethan's kitchen table, and Ruth talked about the valley, who was good, who wasn't where to buy flour for less if you ordered ahead, which of the 2 saloons to walk on the other side of the street from a particularly mean rooster at the Henley place that would go for ankles without provocation. She did not ask how Clara's ribs were broken. She did not ask anything Clara didn't want to answer. What she did very carefully, and without appearing to do it at all, was make sure Clara understood that she had a friend in this valley, that there was a woman within wagon distance who had seen something and chosen to pin up a pillowcase instead of asking questions, that there were women out here who understood the particular grammar of wounds that were not discussed. When Ruth left, Clara stood on the porch and watched the wagon go down the approach road between the gold cottonwoods. She thought about Philadelphia, about the women in Thomas's social circle who had seen the way he spoke to her at parties and looked at their shoes, about the neighbor Mrs. Alcott, who had heard things through the wall between their townhouses and left a pot of soup on the step one morning without knocking, and that had been the closest anyone in Philadelphia had come to Ruth Harper's pillowcase. Clara was beginning to understand that she had come a very long way from Philadelphia in more ways than the ones she had counted. That evening, Ethan came in from the range later than usual. He washed up at the basin outside. He came in and looked at the kitchen table where Clara had spread Pritchard's documents alongside 2 pages of notes in her neat hand, and her father's copy of Montana Territory Land and Proprietorship Statutes, 1875, revised. He sat down across from her and looked at the notes. "You've been at this all day," he said. "I stopped for coffee 3 times," she said without looking up. "And for food?" She looked up. He was watching her with that direct look of his, the one that made her feel like he was reading something she hadn't written yet. She had eaten 2 biscuits at noon and forgotten about dinner. "I'll put something on," she said. "I'll do it," he said. He got up and went to the stove. He did not make it a point, did not announce that he was taking care of her, did not say, "You sit," or "Let me," or anything that would have made her feel managed. He simply started making supper, because it was supper time. Clara watched him at the stove, and felt something she didn't have a clean word for. Not gratitude exactly. Gratitude was what you felt towards someone doing you a favor, and this didn't feel like a favor. It felt like normalcy. Like a version of normal she had not seen before, and was only beginning to understand was possible. She looked back at her papers. "Ethan," she said. Pritchard knows you have been collecting documents. The way these notices are worded, he's accelerating. I think he knows someone is helping you build a countercase." "Maybe," Ethan said. "He's going to look for something to use against you. Against your position here." She paused. "Against me." Ethan was quiet for a moment. The pan sounded on the stove. "He'll look," he said. "That doesn't mean he'll find anything." Clara set her pen down. "He might," she said carefully, "find more than you're expecting." Ethan turned around. She looked at the table. At her father's law book, the spine cracked and worn his handwriting in the margins. She had carried it 2,000 miles, wrapped in her one good blouse, because it was all she had left of him that Whitmore hands hadn't touched. "There are things about me," she said, "that I haven't told you." "I know," Ethan said. She looked up. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," he said. He turned back to the stove. "When you're ready, if you're ready, that's your call, Miss Whitmore." "Clara," she said the way he had said Ethan on the first night. She heard him almost smile. "Clara." She picked up her pen. She went back to the documents. Outside, the Montana dark came down over the valley, and the creek somewhere behind the barn made its quiet sound, and Hector moved from the door to the hearth and settled with a heavy sigh, and a woman who had been holding herself together across 2,000 miles and 3 broken ribs sat at a rancher's kitchen table and began very carefully to let herself believe that she might have made it somewhere real. She wasn't sure yet what real was going to cost her. She had learned to be careful about hope the way you learned to be careful about a step you weren't sure would hold your weight. But she had a bolt on her door. She had a man who rearranged his shelves without being asked. She had a woman who pinned up pillowcases and left it alone. She had land law in her hands, and the first fragile feeling that she was not just surviving anymore. Something in Copper Creek was going to try to take that from her. She could feel it the way her father had taught her to feel the thing wrong in a document. Not see it yet, not name it, but know it was there, waiting in the language hiding in what wasn't said. When it came, she intended to be ready. Pritchard's first move came on a Tuesday. Clara knew it was a move because it arrived wearing the face of courtesy. A man named Dobbins, short, soft-handed, the kind of soft that came from never doing work himself, rode up the approach road mid-morning while Ethan was out on the East Range with Jeb checking fence line. Clara was at the kitchen table with the land documents when she heard the horse, and she did not move from her chair. Dobbins knocked. She opened the door. "Mrs. Calloway," he said with a smile that didn't reach anything above his mouth. "I'm Gerald, that is, I'm representing Commissioner Pritchard's office. Just a friendly call, making sure the new bride is settling in well." "I'm settling fine," Clara said. She did not open the door wider. "Mr. Calloway isn't here." "Oh, I know that." He said it too quick. Cottet adjusted his smile. I mean, I happened to see him ride out earlier. Thought I'd pay a neighborly call on you directly. Commissioner Pritchard wanted me to let you know that he's aware of your situation. Coming all this way. New to the valley. The smile again. He just wants to make sure you know you have friends here beyond the Calloway property line. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Tell Mr. Pritchard I appreciate his concern, she said. And tell him I grew up in a city of 400,000 people, and I learned very young to tell the difference between a neighbor and a man doing reconnaissance. She closed the door. She went back to the table. Her hand, when she picked up her pen, was perfectly steady. She was proud of that. She wrote Dobbins Pritchard's man visited 10 a.m. Tuesday, knows Ethan's schedule, at the top of a clean page, and went back to the survey documents. When Ethan came in at noon, she told him. She told him exactly the words, as close to verbatim as she could manage the timing, the way Dobbins had slipped up about knowing his schedule. She did not editorialize. She laid it out the way her father had laid out facts before a circuit judge, clean sequenced, nothing wasted. Ethan listened without interrupting. He was still in his coat, hadn't sat down yet, standing at the kitchen door with his hat in his hand. When she finished, he looked at the floor for a moment. He's escalating, Ethan said. Yes. Because of the documents. Because someone told him you're building a case, Clara said. Which means he either has someone in town watching, or he's been to the land office and noticed inquiries. She paused. Ethan. He came when you were gone. On purpose. He wanted to look at me. Ethan's jaw set. What did he want to see? Whether I was someone he could use, Clara said, or someone he needed to worry about. Ethan was quiet. Which did he decide? I'm not sure yet, she said. But he didn't look comfortable when he left. Ethan put his hat on the peg by the door and came to the table and sat down and looked at what she had laid out. The survey documents, her notes, the 2 pages of statutory language she had copied by hand from her father's book. He looked at it for a long time. You've been doing this all morning, he said. Most of it. Clara. He waited until she looked up. You don't owe me this. She looked at him straight. I know, she said. I'm doing it because Pritchard is wrong, and I know how to prove it. And I am very tired of watching men who are wrong win, because no one bothered to read the actual law. She picked up her pen. Don't make it sentimental. His mouth moved toward that almost smile again. Yes, ma'am, he said. She went back to writing. He made lunch. It was Ruth Harper who told Clara about Pritchard's history 3 days later, over coffee and the kind of conversation that started about preserves and quietly became something else. Ruth had a way of arriving at the real subject, like she was walking around a house, checking all the sides before she came in the front door. Clara had come to appreciate that about her. Silas Pritchard came to this valley 7 years ago, Ruth said. Had a land commissioner's appointment out of Helena. Nobody elected him. It was a political appointment man. In Helena owed a favor to a man in Pritchard's family back east. She turned her coffee cup slowly. First 2 years he was quiet, polite enough. Then the railroad survey came through and people started understanding what the East Quarter land was worth, and Pritchard started remembering he had authority over surveys. How many families has he displaced? Clara asked. 3 that I know of that took money to settle and left. 2 that fought and lost. Ruth looked up. 1 family, the Garretts. They had a boy who rode to Helena to file a complaint with the territorial office. Boy was 19. He fell off his horse on the way back. She said the last sentence very quietly and without expression. Clara set her cup down. Was it an accident? Clara said, and it was not quite a question. The official finding was yes, Ruth said. Herschel Doane doesn't think so. Herschel doesn't say it in town, but he thinks it. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Has anyone gone to the territorial commissioner directly? Not filed a complaint, gone in person with documents with a witness statement? It's a long ride to Helena, Ruth said. I know how long it is. Ruth looked at her. Something in Ruth's face shifted that same quality of recognition that Clara had seen in Ethan's, the sense of someone recalculating who they were looking at. "You're thinking of going," Ruth said. "I'm thinking about what it would take," Clara said. "Not alone. Not with documents that aren't complete yet." She paused. "Ethan would need to come. And we'd need Herschel Doan's statement before we went so Pritchard couldn't move on Herschel while we were gone." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "You've been planning this." "I've been thinking about it," Clara said. "There's a difference. Planning requires certainty. I'm not certain yet." "What are you waiting to be certain about?" Clara looked at her coffee cup. "Whether the case is strong enough," she said. And then more quietly, "Whether I am." Ruth reached across the table and put her hand over Clara's for just a moment. She didn't say anything. She didn't make it into something to discuss. She just put her hand there and then took it back and picked up her cup, and Clara looked at the table and told herself she was absolutely not going to cry in Ruth Harper's presence on a Wednesday morning over coffee. She did not cry. She came very close. The thing about Ethan that Clara had not expected that she was still learning how to account for was the consistency of him. She had lived with a man whose moods moved through the house before he did, whose footstep on the stair could mean 20 different things, who could be generous and devastating within the same hour. She had learned to read temperature the way animals learned weather early and in the body. Ethan was the same every day, not dull same. There was a difference that she was only beginning to articulate. He was tired some evenings, and quiet some mornings, and short-tempered once when a fence section collapsed a third time in a week, and she heard him say something sharp to Porter that he apologized for 10 minutes later. He was human. But his humanness did not have weather that she needed to survive. It was simply him. Present, consistent, the same man at supper that he had been at breakfast. She caught herself at the end of the second week no longer listening for the sound of his footsteps. She caught herself catching herself and stood in the kitchen for a moment and held very still. It had been 3 years since she had stopped listening for Thomas's footsteps. It had taken her 8 months after the marriage to develop the habit and 14 months after his death to begin to lose it, and she had not fully lost it. She still heard footsteps on the stairs of a boarding house and went quiet inside in a way she couldn't entirely control. She was not going quiet for Ethan's footsteps. She did not know what to do with that. She put the pot on and did not think about it, and thought about nothing else. That night at dinner, she asked him about his wife. She had not asked before. She asked now because she needed to think about something other than herself, and because she was curious, and because she thought he might want to be asked, and might never indicate that he did. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Her name was Anna," he said. "She came out from Ohio. We had 4 years. Children. 1. A boy. He didn't make it to his first winter." He said it simply the way a person speaks about something that has been survived and named and put in its place through long repetition. Anna followed him 2 years later. Fever. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "So am I," he said. "Every day some amount." He looked at his plate. "But the ranch is still here. She wanted it to be. That mattered to her that I keep it." He looked up. "So I'm keeping it." Clara looked at this man across the table, this quiet, straightforward man who had lost a son and a wife and gotten up every morning since, and kept a ranch because a woman he loved had wanted him to, and felt something in her chest that she was not going to name because naming it was not safe yet. "Then we'll keep it," she said. He looked at her. Something in his face went still in a way she was beginning to understand meant he was moved and was not going to show it, except in this one way, this stillness. "Yes," he said. "We will." She looked back at her plate. Outside, the coyotes started up far out on the range, and Hector lifted his head from the hearth and listened, and decided they were none of his business, and put his head back down. The land office in Copper Creek was run by a man named Fells, who was neither Pritchard's ally nor anyone else's, being primarily devoted to his own mild convenience and the avoidance of controversy in all forms. Clara had sized him up in 3 minutes on her first visit when she had gone in to look at the recorded deeds, and she had decided he was not a bad man, just a careful one. And careful men could be moved by sufficient documentation and the right amount of formal language. She went back on a Thursday with a very specific question about the recording date on the 1877 survey and the name of the licensed surveyor who had signed it. Fells found the record. He showed her. She thanked him. She walked out. The surveyor's name was a man called Morrison. He was not a Copper Creek man. He had a license out of Helena and a record of 4 surveys in this county, 3 of which had benefited Pritchard's office in some way. Clara had his name written down before she was off the boardwalk. She went to the telegraph office next. She had composed the wire in her head on the walk over. She sent it to a man named Aldous Carey in Helena, her father's former clerk, now a practicing land attorney, the only person in the territory she had any claim on for a favor. The wire said, "Need Morrison's license history. Stop any complaints on record. Stop. Urgent stop. C. Whitmore, Copper Creek." She walked home in the thin October sunshine, and her ribs ached and she didn't care. Aldous's reply came the next morning. Short as his wires always were, he had once told her father that a telegram was not a letter and should not be treated as one. Morrison license suspended. 1875 reinstated. 1876 stop 1 complaint. Helena Land Office. Stop complaint filed. Withdrawn under pressure. Stop name on file. Stop Carey. Clara read it twice, folded it, put it in the stack with the other documents. A suspended license. A complaint withdrawn under pressure. The same man Pritchard had used to conduct the survey that was currently being used to claim Ethan's East Quarter. She sat down at the table. She lined everything up in order: the original deed, the 1877 survey. Morrison's name, Aldous's wire, Pritchard's co-signature, the statutory language about conflict of interest. She looked at what she had. It was not enough yet. It was nearly enough. It was the shape of enough, and what it needed was Herschel Doane. She told Ethan at dinner. She laid it out every piece in order and watched him follow it. He was good at following. He listened the way some men read, actively tracking the logic, his eyes moving just slightly when something connected. When she finished, he sat back. "You did all of this," he said. "I sent 1 wire and looked at 1 record," she said. "The rest was already there. Pritchard wasn't careful because nobody looked." "Clara." "Don't," she said. He stopped. "Don't make it about me," she said. "Make it about the law. The law is what's going to save this ranch, not whatever you're about to say." He looked at her for a long moment. "I was going to say thank you," he said quietly. She looked at the table. "Oh," she said. "That's all," he said. She kept looking at the table. "You're welcome," she said. There was a silence that was not uncomfortable, and not comfortable either, but something in between that she did not have a name for yet. "We need Herschel," Ethan said. "Tomorrow," Clara said. "If you can take me." "First thing," he said. Herschel Doane was 81 years old, possibly 82, and had homesteaded the Copper Creek Valley before it was called Copper Creek, when it was just a stretch of Montana that hadn't been named yet by anyone who wrote names down. He lived alone in a house that was considerably smaller than his reputation, with a dog older than some marriages, and a memory that was precise and detailed and entirely uninterested in being tactful. He shook Clara's hand when Ethan introduced her and said, "You're the one from Philadelphia," without any particular judgment attached to it, the way a man says you're the one who went to medical school as a fact, a category, nothing more. "I am," she said. "Your father was a lawyer," Herschel said. She looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Ruth Harper talks," he said. "Come in." Inside, over coffee that was terrible and that Clara drank without complaint, she asked Herschel about the creek. He told her. He told her in the specific, unhurried way of a man who had watched a piece of land for 40 years and understood it the way you understood a person you had lived beside its moods, its changes, what stayed and what shifted. He knew exactly where Becker Creek had run in the fall of 1871, when Ethan filed his original claim. He knew because he had helped Ethan stake the markers. He knew because he had watched the creek move 6 feet east over the following 3 years after 2 wet springs. He knew because he was 81 years old and had been paying attention when everyone else was busy. "You'd put that in a sworn statement," Clara said. Herschel looked at her over his coffee cup. "I've been waiting for somebody to ask me," he said. Clara looked at him. "Why didn't you come forward before?" "Nobody came out here with the right question," Herschel said. He glanced at Ethan. "He came once and I told him what I knew and he wrote it down. But writing it down in a notebook ain't the same as a sworn statement before the territorial commissioner, and he didn't know how to get it that far." He looked back at Clara. "You know how." "I know how," she said. "Then let's write it," he said. She drafted the statement at his kitchen table with his dog asleep on her feet. Herschel reviewed every word and corrected 2 things: a date she had written as October, when he was certain it had been September, and a description of the creek's position that he felt was not precise enough, and then signed it in a hand that was slower than it had once been, but entirely legible. Clara folded it with the care she would have given a legal brief going before a judge. On the ride back to the ranch, Ethan was quiet for several miles. Then he said, "He's never done that before. Signed anything official. He doesn't trust paper." "He trusts what's on the paper," Clara said. "There's a difference." Another silence. "You were right," Ethan said. "That first morning. You said you weren't fragile." "I know I was right," Clara said. "I'm saying I believe you now," he said, "in case that matters." It mattered. She was not going to tell him how much. "It's useful," she said. "Practically speaking." She heard him make a small sound that was the closest thing to a real laugh she had gotten out of him yet. She looked at the road ahead and felt something she could not afford to name expanding carefully in her chest, like a thing that had been folded very small for a very long time. She pressed her right arm against her ribs out of habit. Less pain than yesterday, a little less every day. Pritchard made his second move on a Friday evening, and this time he made it himself. He arrived at the ranch just before dark, which was itself a message arriving at dusk when the workday is done, and a man is tired, and his guard is lower, and the polite thing is to offer supper, which obligates. Clara had read that tactic in Thomas's social playbook many times. She recognized it before Pritchard's horse was halfway up the approach road. She went to the window. Then she went to the bedroom and took the folded documents from the dresser drawer where she'd put them and came back to the kitchen and put them in the stove. Not the originals. Copies she had made for exactly this reason. The originals were in the lining of her trunk. Ethan met Pritchard at the porch. Clara stayed in the kitchen doorway, close enough to hear far enough back to watch. Pritchard was a tall man, well-dressed for a county official in a valley that mostly ran to work clothes, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome younger and now carried itself on authority instead. He shook Ethan's hand with both of his, which meant he was being deliberately warm, which meant he was worried. "Calloway," he said. "Good to see you. Heard you had a new wife. Wanted to pay my respects." He looked past Ethan and found Clara in the kitchen doorway. He smiled. "Mrs. Calloway, what a pleasure." "Mr. Pritchard," Clara said, "I hope you're finding the valley to your liking. It's a remarkable part of the territory. Beautiful land." He paused, and the pause was not accidental. "Beautiful land takes careful management. That's what my office is here for, really. Making sure the records are right. Making sure everyone knows what belongs to whom." "That sounds like important work," Clara said. "It is," Pritchard said. "It truly is, which is why I like to get ahead of any confusion, before it becomes a legal matter. These things can get complicated very quickly, very expensive." His eyes moved to Ethan. "I've been hearing some talk that you've been making inquiries about the East Quarter survey. I just want you to know that survey was done by a licensed professional, and I stand behind every word of it." "That's good to know," Ethan said. His voice was entirely neutral. "I'd hate to see a good man like you spend money on legal fees over something that's already settled," Pritchard said, "especially with a new wife to provide for. Starting over isn't cheap." He smiled at Clara again. It did not get anywhere near his eyes. I imagine you know something about starting over, Mrs. Calloway. Clara looked at him steadily. I do, she said. I find I'm quite good at it. Something flickered in Pritchard's face, not quite uncertainty, the early neighbor of it. Well, he said, just a friendly call. I hope you'll think about what I've said, Calloway. He shook Ethan's hand again. Mrs. Calloway. He tipped his hat. He rode out the way he'd come. Ethan came back inside and stood in the kitchen and looked at Clara. He knows we have something, Clara said. He came to see how much. What did you do with the documents? The copies are in the stove. The originals are safe. She paused. He's not going to stop at visits. That was a warning. I know, Ethan said. He mentioned expensive legal fees, Clara said. He's going to try to file something first. Force you to respond rather than act. If he files a quiet title action before we get to the territorial commissioner, it goes through his county office, and he controls the timeline. How long do we have? I don't know. A week. Maybe less if he rides to Helena. She looked at the table. We need to go first, soon, with everything we have. How soon can you be ready? She thought about Herschel's statement in the lining of her trunk, Aldous' wire, the survey documents, her 14 pages of notes. 2 days, she said. I need to copy one more thing and write a covering letter to the commissioner's office. 2 days. Ethan nodded. 2 days, he said. He went to start supper, and she went back to the table and picked up her pen, and her hand was shaking very slightly, and she pressed her left hand flat on the page until it stopped. She knew what Pritchard would find if he dug. She had known for weeks that he would dig. She had been building the case faster than he could, because she knew that when he found what he was looking for, everything was going to change in ways she could not entirely control. Thomas Whitmore's name was going to come into this valley, and when it did, she was going to have to tell Ethan everything before Pritchard told him a version of it that was worse than the truth. She had 2 days. 2 days to finish what she had built, and then she was going to have to sit across from the only man who had ever given her a bolt on a door and tell him exactly what she had run from. She picked up her pen and wrote until the lamp burned low, and her hand ached, and Ethan told her twice to come to bed, and she said in a minute both times, and meant it both times, and finally put the pen down at close to midnight, and sat in the quiet dark kitchen of a man who was none of the things she had been afraid of. She was afraid of a different thing now. She was afraid that when she told him he would look at her differently, that the steadiness she had come to rely on in ways she hadn't meant to would shift, that he would decide she was damaged or dangerous or the wrong kind of complicated. She had built cases before judges who wanted her to fail. She had kept her composure in rooms full of people who had already decided what she was. She could do hard things. She had proved that sufficiently. But she had never told the truth to someone whose opinion she had begun quietly and without meaning to care about. That was a different kind of hard. She blew out the lamp and went to her room and slid the bolt, and lay in the dark under the double wedding ring quilt, and listened to the ranch settle into night around her, and told herself she was going to sleep. She told herself that 3 times before she believed it enough to close her eyes. And in the last moment before sleep, she thought about Ethan's voice saying, I believe you now, on the road from Herschel's place, and the way it had sat in her chest, like something warm, and she thought that was the most dangerous thing that had happened to her in this valley, so far more dangerous than Pritchard, and more dangerous than Dobbins, and more dangerous than all of it put together. She slept. 2 days, she thought, just before the dark took her. 2 days. She had 1 day left. Clara knew it the way she knew weather coming not from what she could see, but from what she could feel in the changed quality of everything around her. She had spent the first day copying the final document in her cleanest hand and drafting the covering letter to the Territorial Commissioner's office, and she had spent the second morning reviewing everything twice the way her father had reviewed briefs before filing, looking for the one weak place a hostile reader would find first. She found 2 weak places. She fixed them. She was nearly done. And then Jeb knocked on the kitchen door at 10:30, with his hat in his hands, and a look on his face that men in this part of the world wore when they were delivering news they wished someone else had to deliver. "There's a rider come in, ma'am," he said. "From the telegraph office. Wire for you." She took it. Jeb left fast. The wire was from Aldous Carey in Helena. It was 4 lines, and it changed everything. "Whitmore Family Inquiry received Helena Land Office yesterday. Stop. Gerald Whitmore named. Stop. Asking your location and marital status. Stop. Suggest you move quickly. Stop. Carey." Clara read it standing at the kitchen door with the morning cold coming off the range behind her. She read it again. She folded it with hands that were entirely steady and put it in her apron pocket and went back to the table and sat down. Gerald Whitmore had found her. Not found located. There was a difference, and the difference mattered. He had not arrived. He had sent an inquiry. He was still in the east or in Helena, which meant she had hours, possibly a day, before whatever he was building arrived at her door. She picked up her pen. She did not think about Thomas. She thought about the documents in front of her, and the ones in the trunk lining, and Herschel Doane's careful signature, and what the Territorial Commissioner's office needed to receive before Pritchard filed anything, and she wrote the last 2 paragraphs of the covering letter without stopping. When Ethan came in for the noon meal, she was sealing the envelope. He looked at her face. He put his hat on the peg and sat down across from her without being asked. "Tell me," he said. She told him about the wire. She put it on the table between them and let him read it. She watched him read it and watched his jaw do the thing it did, and she waited. "Gerald Whitmore," he said. "That's the brother." "You know about the brother?" "I know there was a family," he said carefully. "The agency mentioned it, said your previous husband had passed and that his family had contested something. They didn't say what." Clara looked at the sealed envelope in her hands. She had 2 choices, and she had known it for 2 weeks, and she had been calculating the timing, and the timing had just run out. "Ethan," she said, "I need to tell you something before you hear it from someone else." He said nothing. He waited. That was one of the things about him. He never filled the space before she was ready. He just waited, entirely present, as if he had all the time there was. So she told him. She started with Thomas Whitmore. Not from the beginning, not from the courtship or the wedding or the first year when she had still believed she could manage it. Make it better. Be different enough. She started with the staircase, because that was the fact that was going to matter legally, and she had learned from her father that in any proceeding you led with the fact that could not be argued with. "He pushed me," she said. "November of last year. We had argued about money, about my father's books specifically, which Thomas felt were cluttering the study. He pushed me at the top of the staircase, and I fell down 11 steps. She kept her voice level. 3 ribs on the right side. My wrist. A cut on my head that bled considerably. She paused. I told the doctor I had fallen. He may or may not have believed me. I don't know, and it didn't matter because no one asked twice. Ethan's hands on the table had gone still. Thomas had a weak heart, Clara said. His physician had told him 2 years prior. 11 days after the staircase, he had an episode in his study and died before anyone could send for help. I found him. She looked at the table. Gerald Whitmore has believed since the day of the funeral that I caused Thomas's death deliberately. He has no evidence because there is none, but that has not changed his certainty. She paused. He threatened me at the funeral, in the front parlor with 6 people in the next room. He told me that if I tried to claim anything from the estate, my own belongings, my father's books, anything, he would see me tried for murder. He had a lawyer present. I believe he meant it. Silence. The clock on the mantel ticked. Hector shifted by the hearth. So I took what I could carry, Clara said. My father's 2 law books. The clothes I had. What money I had from my own accounts that Thomas hadn't absorbed. And I went to the matrimonial agency. She finally looked up. I was not trying to deceive you. I was trying to survive. There is a difference. Ethan looked at her. She had been preparing herself for this look for 2 weeks. She had categorized the possible versions of it: suspicion, pity, the particular cold retreat of a man deciding a woman was more complicated than she was worth. She had prepared responses for each version. He said, How long did you carry this alone? Just that. Not what she had prepared for. The question went through her like something breaking open. Not violently, the way ice breaks in spring, sudden and inevitable, and quietly catastrophic. She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry. She had decided that. She had decided it clearly and in advance, and with full intention. She cried. Not the way she had cried in that Philadelphia boarding house the night before she left, which had been desperate and silent and frightened. This was different. This was the sound a person makes when they have been holding something at arm's length for so long that their arms have gone numb, and someone simply walks up and takes it from them, and the relief is so complete it breaks through every wall they've ever built. She had one hand over her mouth and the other flat on the table, and she was crying in the kitchen of a man she had known for 3 weeks, and she could not stop. Ethan came around the table. He didn't rush. He pulled the chair beside her and sat down and put his arm around her shoulders very carefully, accounting for her ribs, with a gentleness that made her cry harder. And she turned into his shoulder, because she had no defenses left, and she was so tired of having defenses. And he was warm and solid, and he smelled like horses and wood smoke and cold air. He didn't say anything for a long time. He didn't tell her it was all right. He didn't tell her she was safe now, because safe now was a promise, and he was not a man who made promises he wasn't certain he could keep. He just put his arm around her and let her cry, and that was more than anyone had done in 3 years, and it was enough. It was more than enough. When she could speak again, she pulled back, and he let her, and she wiped her face with the backs of her hands and did not apologize for crying, because she had decided years ago she would not apologize for crying. It was the one thing she had held on to. "The case is strong," she said. Her voice was rough. "Gerald has no legal standing here. Thomas died of heart failure. The physician's record says so. There is no criminal finding, no inquest, nothing. Gerald's position is personal, not legal." "Clara," Ethan said. "But if he arrives before we get to Helena—" "Clara." His voice was quiet, but it stopped her. She looked at him. "The case can wait 5 minutes," he said. She looked at him. His face was the face of a man who was angry. Not at her, she could read the direction of it. It was pointed somewhere else entirely, at the shape of what Thomas Whitmore had done and gotten away with, and underneath the anger, something that was steadier and more durable. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "You understand me? Whatever Whitmore sends here, whatever Pritchard does, whatever comes, you're not facing it alone. That's done. That part is done." She looked at him for a long moment. "You don't know what Gerald is capable of," she said. "No," Ethan said. "But I know what I am." She believed him. That was the thing. She believed him not because she was desperate, or because she had no other choice, but because he had given her 3 weeks of evidence, and the evidence was consistent, and she was a woman who knew how to read evidence. She looked at the sealed envelope on the table. "We need to leave for Helena tomorrow morning," she said. "First light," he said. She nodded. She straightened in her chair and picked up the envelope and put it with the document stack. Her hands were steadier now than they had been in days. Something about saying the thing aloud, having it witnessed and not destroyed by the witnessing something about that, had settled her in a way no amount of preparation had managed. Ethan went back to his chair, and they sat across the table from each other in the afternoon quiet, and she thought about what it meant to be believed. She had given testimony to it before to Ruth implicitly through pillowcases and coffee, but this was different. This was the whole truth named and placed on a table, and he had not moved back from it. He had moved toward her. She did not know what to do with that yet. She filed it the way she filed important documents, carefully, in a place she could find again for later. Ruth arrived an hour later, as if she had somehow known, which Clara was beginning to think was simply how Ruth operated on a frequency that ran slightly ahead of events. She came in with bread she had baked that morning, and took one look at Clara's face and said, "What happened?" And Clara told her about Gerald's inquiry, and the wire from Aldous, and the plan to leave for Helena in the morning. Ruth listened the way she always listened, complete and still. "He's going to come here while you're gone," Ruth said. "Gerald, if he's already making inquiries in Helena, he knows where you are. He'll come to the ranch." "I know," Clara said. "You want me to be here." "I want you to know what's happening," Clara said. I'm not going to ask you to. I'll be here, Ruth said. Me and Martin both. We'll bring the Garrity boys too if it comes to it. She set the bread on the table. That man is not walking onto this ranch and going through your things while you're gone. I'll see to that personally. Clara looked at her. Ruth. Don't you dare thank me, Ruth said briskly. Eat some bread. Clara ate some bread. It was the best bread she had eaten in 11 days of traveling and 3 weeks of Montana, and she said so, and Ruth told her the secret was the temperature of the water. You dissolved the yeast in, and Clara filed that too. They spent that evening preparing. Ethan packed what they would need for the ride 2 days to Helena on horseback traveling fast. Clara repacked the documents into the leather satchel she had brought from Philadelphia, the one that had held her father's case files when he was alive, and she went through each item one more time, the way you check a structure before you put weight on it. At 9 o'clock she went to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the bolt on the door, and thought about the night before she had left Philadelphia, sitting on the floor of a boarding house room, with her back against the door, because the room had no bolt, and the landlady had said the lock was being fixed, and Clara had been too afraid to sleep anywhere that wasn't braced by her own body. She slid the bolt closed. She got into bed. She slept in 4 hours, which was more than she had expected. Before light, she was dressed and had her satchel ready and was in the kitchen making coffee when Ethan came through. He looked at the coffee and then at her. You slept, he said. Some, she said. Good. He took the cup she handed him. They rode out as the sky went gray in the east, not yet light but lightening, and the valley was quiet around them and cold. And Clara rode with the satchel across her saddle, and her back straight, and her right arm only slightly braced the ribs better than they had been, not healed but manageable. A lot of things were manageable that she hadn't thought would be. The road to Helena was long and open, and they rode mostly without talking, which suited Clara fine. Her mind was on the Territorial Commissioner's office, on a man named Aldous had mentioned once in a letter, Commissioner Everett Baines, reputation for running a clean office appointed by the governor 2 years ago, no known connection to Pritchard. She was building the presentation in her head, ordering the documents, anticipating objections. At midday, they stopped by a creek to water the horses and eat the food Ruth had pressed on them that morning. Biscuits and dried meat and 2 apples, and Ethan said, "Tell me what you need from me when we get there." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "In the commissioner's office," he said. "You've been building this case. You know it better than I do. Tell me what you need." She thought about it. "I'll present the documents," she said. "You're the landowner of record. When Baines asks you direct questions about the original claim, you answer them directly. Don't add anything I haven't coached you on. Don't speculate. Just answer what's asked." "All right." "And when Gerald's name comes up," she paused. "It may come up. If Pritchard has already been in contact with Baines's office, Gerald's inquiry may already be on record." "What do I do if it comes up?" "Nothing," she said. "Let me handle it." He looked at her. "You sure?" "I've been handling Gerald Whitmore's version of me since the day of Thomas's funeral," she said. "I know every word of his argument. I've been preparing the response for 11 months. Ethan nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "I'll follow your lead." She bit into her apple and looked at the creek and thought that she had never in her life had a man tell her he would follow her lead and mean it simply without caveat or condition, the way Ethan had just said it. They reached Helena in the late afternoon of the second day, trail dusty and stiff from the saddle, and took rooms at a boarding house near the territorial offices. Clara washed her face and repacked the satchel and reviewed the covering letter one more time. The territorial commissioner's office opened at 8 in the morning. She was going to be on the steps at 5 minutes to 8. She was sitting at the small desk in her room going through the documents for the last time when she heard it. Boots in the hallway outside her room, too deliberate, too measured. And then a knock that was not Ethan's knock. She knew Ethan's knock. This was different. She did not move from the desk. "Who is it?" she said. A pause. Then, "You know who it is, Clara." Gerald Whitmore's voice had not changed. It still had that quality of a man accustomed to being the largest thing in a room, smooth on the surface and very hard underneath. She had heard it at the funeral. She had heard it in her dreams for 11 months. She stood up. She checked the bolt on the door. Thank God a bolt. This room had a bolt, and it was thrown. She stood on her side of it and said, "How did you know which room?" "I asked the landlady," he said. "I told her I was your brother-in-law. She was very helpful." "What do you want, Gerald?" "To talk," he said. "Just to talk. Clara, I've come a long way." "So have I," she said. "And I have nothing to say to you that isn't better said in front of a commissioner." A silence. "The commissioner," he said, and his voice had changed slightly, not surprised but recalibrating. He had not known she was planning to go to Baines. He had thought he was ahead of her. "You've been busy." "Go away, Gerald," she said. "I'll see you tomorrow morning in the commissioner's office if you intend to pursue this. That's the only place I'll speak to you. You can't walk in there with some land case and think." "I'm not walking in with some land case," she said. "I'm walking in with a fraudulent survey, a licensed surveyor with a disciplinary record, a sworn eyewitness statement, 14 pages of statutory analysis, and the original deed that your friend Silas Pritchard has been claiming doesn't say what it says." She paused. "And if you attempt to introduce anything about Thomas, I will introduce the physician's record of my injuries from November of last year, which I obtained from his office before I left Philadelphia. I had the foresight. In case you're wondering, nothing from the other side of the door. That's the physician's record of broken ribs and a wrist injury and a scalp laceration," Clara said, and her voice was very steady, steadier than she had believed it could be with Gerald Whitmore 3 feet away, and only 1 inch of wood between them. Filed in his own hand, dated 9 days before Thomas's heart episode. "I did not cause Thomas's death. His own failing heart caused Thomas's death. I have the records to prove it, and I will put them in front of Commissioner Baines tomorrow, and I will not be ashamed of a single word." A very long silence. "You should have stayed in Philadelphia," Gerald said, and his voice had gone flat. The smoothness gone something beneath it that was ugly and cornered. "No," Clara said. "Philadelphia was yours. This is mine." She heard him breathe. She heard him turn. She heard his boots go back down the hall, slow and deliberate, the way they had come, and then the sound of the stairs, and then nothing. She stood at her door for a long time. Her legs were shaking. She became aware of this gradually and with a kind of distant interest, the way you become aware of something after the crisis has passed and the body finally reports in. Her legs were shaking, and her right hand was pressed against her ribs, not because they hurt, but because it was the gesture she had made under pressure so many times that her body went to it automatically. She went to the wall that separated her room from Ethan's, and she knocked twice. His door opened within seconds. He looked at her face. "He was here," she said. "Gerald, he's in Helena." Ethan looked at the hallway. "Did he—" "He's gone?" she said. "I handled it." She pressed her lips together. "I told him about the physician's record." Ethan looked back at her. "You have the physician's record." "I've had it since Philadelphia," she said. "I obtained it the week before I left. I wasn't sure I would ever need it. I hoped I wouldn't, but I have it." He was quiet for a moment. "Clara," he said. "Don't," she said, and she was not sure what she was telling him not to do, not to look at her like that, not to make her feel how scared she had been, not to be kind right now when kind might undo her completely. He nodded. "Okay," he said. "I need to sleep," she said. "I need to be sharp tomorrow." "I know," he said. He paused. "You did good, Clara. Whatever he said, however he came at you, you did good." She looked at the floor. "I was shaking," she said. Not a confession exactly, more like a record she wanted on file. "I know," he said. "You did it anyway. That's the whole of it." She looked up at him. This man standing in a doorway in Helena, Montana, trail dusty and steady as the land he was fighting for, looking at her like she was something he was glad to have found. 8 o'clock, she said. I'll be ready at 7:30, he said. She went back to her room. She bolted the door. She put the physician's record on top of the document stack. She would want it first accessible, not buried. And she got into the narrow boarding house bed and looked at the ceiling. Gerald was in Helena. He would be at the commissioner's office tomorrow. She had known this was coming, and she had told herself she was prepared, and she had been mostly prepared. But there was a difference between being prepared and being ready. And ready was what she needed to be. She thought about Ethan's voice. You did it anyway. That's the whole of it. She thought about the physician's record in her father's handwriting. No, in the physician's handwriting, she had to stop doing that. Her father was gone, and she had to let herself know that, and about the 14 pages of statutory analysis, and Herschel Doan's signature, and Morrison's suspended license. She thought about what she had built from nothing in 3 weeks in a kitchen in Montana with a man who rearranged his shelves and made coffee and said, "Follow your lead like it cost him nothing." She was ready. The ceiling above her was plain wood, unpainted, the grain of it catching the last of the evening light through the small window. She studied it until the light was gone and the room was dark, and then she closed her eyes. Tomorrow, Gerald Whitmore was going to walk into Commissioner Baines's office, believing he was holding all the power in the room. He had believed that since the day of the funeral. He had built his entire case on the assumption that she was alone and afraid and without resources, that she had run west to disappear, that whatever she had built out here was fragile enough to knock down with the right words and the right name, and the right amount of money applied to the right places. He did not know what she had built. He did not know about Herschel Doan or Morrison's license or Aldous Carey or Ruth Harper standing on a ranch porch in Copper Creek right now, ready to hold that ground until Clara came back. He did not know about Ethan Calloway, who was in the next room 5 feet away, and who was going to walk into that office tomorrow and stand beside her without being asked. Gerald Whitmore had come all this way, believing Clara was the same woman who had pressed her back against a locked door in a Philadelphia boarding house and waited for morning. She had been that woman. She did not fault herself for it. But she was not that woman anymore, and tomorrow Gerald Whitmore was going to find that out in front of a territorial commissioner with a reputation for running a clean office, and the evidence was going to speak for itself, and Clara Whitmore was going to stand up straight and let it. Her right side barely ached. She had not noticed until now. She pressed her hand there anyway out of habit, and felt the slow, steady rhythm of her own breathing, even and unhurried, and she thought, I see you, I believe you, and I'm not going anywhere. Not Ethan's voice in her mind, or not only his, her own voice too, saying it to herself for the first time and meaning it and sleeping. She was on the steps of the Territorial Commissioner's office at 7:55. Ethan was beside her. He had been ready at 7:30 exactly as promised. Coat-brushed hat squared the particular stillness of a man who had decided something and was not going to be moved from it. He had not asked her how she slept. He had handed her coffee and looked at the satchel on the table and said, "Everything in order?" And she had said yes, and that had been enough. The morning was cold and clear. Helena was louder than Copper Creek by a factor of 10, the streets already moving with freight wagons and men on horseback, and the particular noise of a territorial capital that never quite stopped. Clara stood on the steps with the satchel against her side and watched the door and did not think about Gerald. She thought about the order of the documents. Deed first, then the timeline, then Morrison's license record, then the co-signature conflict, then Herschel's statement. The physician's record last available, but not led with. She did not want Baines's first impression of her to be a woman presenting evidence of her own injuries. She wanted his first impression to be a woman presenting an airtight land case, and then, if Gerald forced the issue, she would put the physician's record on the table and let it speak. She had run the sequence 12 times in her mind before she slept, and 3 times when she woke. It was right. She knew it was right. The door opened at 8 o'clock. Commissioner Everett Baines was not what she had expected, which meant she had been wrong to form expectations, and she filed that away as a reminder. He was younger than she had pictured, 40 perhaps, with a rangy build and the quick eyes of a man who read a great deal and trusted what he read less than what he observed directly. He shook Ethan's hand and looked at Clara with an assessment that was not unkind, but was not polite either, just direct, the look of a man deciding what category of thing he was dealing with. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "your letter arrived yesterday afternoon. I read it last night." "Then you know why we're here," Clara said. "I know your version of why you're here," he said. "Come in." His office was smaller than she had imagined a commissioner's office would be, which told her something about the man he had not arranged the space to impress. 2 chairs across from his desk, a third against the wall, a window behind him that let in the cold morning light. He sat, and they sat, and Clara put the satchel on her knees and opened it. "I'd like to present the documents in a specific order," she said, "if you'll allow it." Baines looked at her. "You've tried cases before." "I've assisted in them," she said. "My father was an attorney." "I see." He leaned back. "Go ahead, Mrs. Calloway." She went through it in the order she had planned. She put each document on his desk as she spoke to it, naming it, citing the relevant statutory provision, moving on. She did not rush, and she did not drag. She watched Baines's eyes track each page, and she tracked his eyes, and she could see the moment the Morris & Co. signature landed a slight narrowing, a pull at the corner of his mouth that was not approval exactly, more like a man recognizing a shape he has seen before, and did not like the last time he saw it either. When she put Herschel Doane's statement on the desk, Baines read it twice. "Herschel Doane," he said. "He's been in that valley since before the territorial designation." 40+ years, Clara said. "He watched the creek shift personally. He helped Mr. Calloway stake the original boundary markers." Baines looked at Ethan. "You want to confirm that Mr. Calloway—" "Yes, sir," Ethan said. "Fall of 1871. Herschel walked the line with me. He knows every foot of it." Baines looked back at the statement. He set it down. He looked at the array of documents on his desk and was quiet for a moment, in the way of a man assembling something in his mind. "The Morrison license issue," he said. "You obtained this from our office records, from a Helena attorney named Aldous Carey," Clara said. "He confirmed it against the Territorial License Registry. The original complaint record is on file here." "I'm aware of it," Baines said, and something in his voice had changed slightly. Something that told Clara he was more aware of it than he was going to say directly, which meant Pritchard's name had come across this desk before in some context and had not been forgotten. She pressed her advantage. "Commissioner," she said, "I want to be direct with you. Silas Pritchard co-signed a survey conducted by a man whose license had been suspended and reinstated under circumstances that involved a withdrawn complaint. He then used that survey to initiate a quiet title challenge against Mr. Calloway's East Quarter land, that the original deed describes clearly, land that a credible eyewitness places within the original boundary land, that Pritchard has every financial incentive to dispute, given the railroad survey valuations from last spring." She paused. "That is not a clerical error. That is a pattern." Baines looked at her. "You said your father was an attorney," he said. "Yes." "He taught you well," Baines said, and it was not a compliment exactly, or not only a compliment, it was the acknowledgement of one person who takes law seriously to another, which Clara thought was worth more than a compliment anyway. The door opened. She had been waiting for it. She had known from the moment Gerald said "Commissioner" in the hallway last night that he would be here. She had positioned her chair at the angle she had the satchel closed, and on the floor beside her, for exactly this reason. Gerald Whitmore walked in like a man who owned the room. He was dressed for it. City clothes, Philadelphia money, the kind of suit that said, "I am not from here, and I do not intend to become from here." He had a lawyer with him, a thin man with a dispatch case, who introduced himself as Hargrove, and looked at Clara the way lawyers look at problems they have been hired to make go away. "Commissioner Baines," Gerald said, extending his hand, the voice smooth, the smile on the whole performance exact. "Gerald Whitmore, Philadelphia. I apologize for the interruption. I was told you had a meeting this morning regarding a land matter, and I believe it may intersect with a personal matter I've come to discuss." "Mr. Whitmore," Baines said. He did not get up. He did not take the offered hand. I don't conduct open meetings. You'll need to schedule an appointment. Gerald looked at Clara. The smile stayed, but something behind it went very hard. I see my sister-in-law is already here, he said. Then perhaps you'll understand why I felt the urgency. Sit down, Mr. Whitmore, Baines said. Since you're here, you can sit and you can listen. You'll have an opportunity to speak when I'm done with Mrs. Calloway. Gerald sat. His lawyer sat beside him. Gerald's eyes stayed on Clara, and she did not look away from them, and she did not look at them either. She looked through them, the way she had learned to look through Thomas's eyes when he wanted her to flinch. And she felt Gerald recalibrate in real time, felt the moment he understood that whatever version of her he had come here expecting was not the version in this room. Good, she thought. Let him recalibrate. It cost him time, and it cost him certainty. And those were the two things she needed him short of. Go ahead, Mrs. Calloway, Baines said. I have one more document, she said. She reached into the satchel. She put the physician's record on the desk. She had decided in the night to lead with it after all. Not because she had changed her strategy, because she had recognized somewhere in the last dark hour before sleep that walking into this room and waiting for Gerald to force the issue was still letting Gerald control the sequence. She was done letting Gerald control any sequence. This is a physician's record filed November 14, 1877 in Philadelphia, she said. The physician's name is Dr. Albert Morse, licensed and practicing his office on Walnut Street. He examined me following a fall on the staircase of my home. His record notes 3 fractured ribs on the right side, a fractured wrist, and a scalp laceration. She paused. The injury was not a fall. My husband, Thomas Whitmore, pushed me from the top of the staircase. Thomas died 11 days later of heart failure, documented confirmed entirely consistent with the cardiac history his own physician had been tracking for 2 years. She looked directly at Baines. I am presenting this because Mr. Whitmore's presence in this office today is not about land law. It is about a family that has spent 11 months attempting to use the threat of false accusation to silence me. I want it on record in this office before he speaks that I know exactly what he is here to do, and I have the documentation to answer it. She put her hands in her lap. The room was very quiet. Gerald's lawyer leaned toward Gerald and said something Clara couldn't hear. Gerald did not respond to it. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before in all the months of his campaign against her. It took her a moment to identify it. It was the look of a man who has just realized he has lost. He had not admitted it yet. That would take longer. But the look was there underneath the surface, and she saw it. Mr. Whitmore, Baines said, you said you had a personal matter. Gerald composed himself. Commissioner, the woman in this room fled Philadelphia under circumstances that are legally relevant. My brother's death. Your brother's physician's record is on my desk, Baines said. His cardiac history is documented. Are you disputing the cause of death? I'm disputing. Are you disputing the physician's finding? A pause. The timing was 11 days, Baines said. Between an injury your family's physician documented and a cardiac event your brother's physician documented as consistent with a 2-year progression. Do you have a medical expert disputing either record? Gerald's lawyer said something again quietly. No, Gerald said. Then what specifically are you here to present? Baines said. Nothing. Gerald looked at Clara. She looked back. She did not help him. Mr. Whitmore, Baines said. I'm going to tell you something plainly. I've been in this office for 2 years. I know Silas Pritchard. I know his methods. I know what his surveys have been used for in this valley, and I have been waiting for someone to come in here with documentation sufficient to warrant a formal investigation. He looked at the papers on his desk. Mrs. Calloway has brought me that documentation. Whatever personal grievance you have traveled from Philadelphia to press, I would strongly suggest you think carefully about pressing it in this office in conjunction with a land fraud matter in front of a territorial official who is going to be writing a report to the governor's office before the end of this week. Silence. Gerald stood up. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Clara one more time and she looked back, and neither of them said anything, and then he walked out. His lawyer half a step behind him, the door closing with a sound that was quieter than she expected, almost gentle, which somehow made it more final. Clara breathed. Ethan beside her had not moved during any of it. He had sat with his hat on his knee and his hands quiet, and he had let her do every word of it, and she felt the value of that, of a man who knew when the right thing to do was nothing, who had enough confidence in her to let her work. Baines was looking at the documents. He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to order a new survey," he said. "Licensed surveyor out of Helena County connection. Morrison's work on the Callaway parcel is voided pending investigation." He picked up a pen. "The co-signature conflict is sufficient grounds. The eyewitness statement is corroborating. I'll have a formal finding within the week." He looked at Ethan. "Your East Quarter is not going anywhere, Mr. Callaway." Ethan said, "Thank you, Commissioner." Baines looked at Clara. "Mrs. Callaway," he said, "your father's profession is Montana's gain." He paused. "I'm sorry for what brought you here. I mean that." "Thank you," she said. And then, because she had earned the right to say it, and she was going to say it, "So am I. But I'm not sorry I came." They walked out of the commissioner's office into the cold Helena morning, and Clara stood on the steps and let out the breath she had been holding since 7:55. Ethan stood beside her. He looked at the street. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You knew he was going to come in." "Yes." "You changed the order, the physician's record." "Yes." "Why?" She thought about it. "Because waiting for him to force it was still letting him set the terms," she said. "I'm done letting Whitmore men set my terms." Ethan was quiet. Then he said, "Baines said Morrison's work is voided. Pending investigation," she said. "But yes, the survey is gone. Pritchard has no legal instrument." "Which means Pritchard is going to know by the end of the week." "Yes," she said. "He's going to know it came from us. From me." She paused. "He's going to come to the ranch." "Let him come," Ethan said. She looked at him. "Ruth's there," he said. "Herschel knows what happened. The valley knows what Pritchard has been doing. A man without a legal instrument and without the commissioner's backing is just a man making noise." He paused. "And you've dealt with louder noise than Silas Pritchard." She almost laughed. It came out shorter than a laugh, more like the sound of something being released. "That's true," she said. They stood on the steps in the cold morning, and then Ethan said, "We should send a wire to Ruth. Let her know." "Yes," Clara said. "And then I'd like breakfast," he said. "Real breakfast. Eggs and something that isn't biscuits from a saddlebag." This time she did laugh. It was real, and it was short, but it was real. "Yes," she said. "That too." They sent the wire first. Clara wrote it 8 words. Baines ordered new survey. Stop coming home. Stop see. And then they found a place on the main street that smelled like coffee and bacon, and they sat across from each other at a small table and ordered eggs and ate them while Helena moved past the window and Clara's hands finally fully stopped shaking. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said. "Yes." "The physician's record," he said. "You've had it since Philadelphia." "Yes." "You carried it 2,000 miles, he said. "In the satchel." "In the lining of my trunk," she said. "With my father's law books." He looked at his coffee cup. "You were planning to fight them even before you left," he said. "Not a question." "I was planning to survive," she said. "Fighting was I didn't know what shape it would take. I knew I needed the record. I knew that if Gerald ever tried to make it official, I needed to be able to answer officially." She paused. "I didn't know I'd be answering in a territorial commissioner's office in Helena with a land fraud case attached." "But you answered," he said. "Yes." He looked up at her. "How are your ribs?" The question was so different from what she had expected, so entirely practical. "So Ethan," she felt the warmth of it move through her before she could stop it. "Better," she said. "Honestly, better every day." "Good," he said. He went back to his eggs. She went back to hers. They rode home the next morning, the return road easier than the outbound. The weight of the thing they'd gone to do lifted sufficiently that the miles felt shorter. Clara rode with the empty satchel and thought about what came next. Not Gerald, not even Pritchard, but the quieter things. The kitchen table. The land case officially in Baines's hands. The moment she could put her father's law books on a shelf that was hers and stop carrying them against her body like something she might need to grab on the way out the door. She had not put them on a shelf yet. She had not let herself do that. Shelves were for people who were staying, and she had not been certain until Baines said, "Your East Quarter is not going anywhere," that staying was a thing she was allowed to do. She thought she might put them on the shelf when she got back. She thought she might let herself do that one thing. They came into the valley in the late afternoon. The cottonwoods stripped, now October nearly done, the range gone brown gold, under a sky that was too blue for what it had been put next to. Clara had thought when she arrived that this was someone else's sky. She had not had the category for it. She was beginning to develop the category. Ruth's wagon was in the yard. Clara's stomach tightened before she could stop it. Old reflex, the sight of something unexpected triggering the old reading of signs. What does this mean? What has happened? Is this good? Or... And then Ruth came around the side of the house, and her face was entirely normal. The face of a woman who has been doing things and is pleased about it. And Clara breathed. "You're back," Ruth said. "Early enough. I've been here since yesterday, Martin, too. Pritchard's man Dobbins came by yesterday morning." "What did he do?" Ethan said. "He knocked," Ruth said. "I answered. I told him Mr. and Mrs. Calloway were away on business with the Territorial Commissioner's office and would be back shortly. He left." She paused. He looked like a man who had just heard something he hadn't expected. "He had?" Clara said. Ruth looked at her. "It worked," she said. "It worked," Clara said. Ruth made a sound that was not quite a word and pulled Clara into a hug that was brief and solid and smelled like bread flour and wood smoke. And Clara stood in it for exactly as long as she needed to, and then stepped back. "Pritchard came himself this morning," Ruth said. Clara went still. "What?" "About 9 o'clock. Not Dobbins Pritchard himself. He wanted to speak to Ethan." Ruth looked at Ethan. "I told him Ethan wasn't here. He asked when you'd be back. I said I didn't know. He stood there for a good minute looking at the house like he was deciding something, and then he rode out." "He knows," Clara said. "He got word from Helena." "Probably," Ruth said. "He didn't look like a man making a friendly call." "He won't be making any kind of call much longer," Ethan said. Baines voided the survey. It's in writing. Whatever Pritchard was planning to do with that East Quarter, he has no instrument to do it with. Ruth looked at Ethan and then at Clara, back and forth assembling the picture. "All of it," she said. "You got all of it." "Clara got all of it," Ethan said. Clara shook her head. "We brought what we had," she said. "Herschel's statement mattered as much as anything. Your being there mattered." She looked at Ruth. "Your being here mattered." "It did," Ethan said quietly. Ruth waved this off with the briskness she used when she was actually moved and did not intend to show it. "Come inside," she said. "I made soup this morning, and it's been on the stove all day, which means it's either perfect or a disaster." It was perfect. They sat at the kitchen table, all three of them, and Clara ate Ruth's soup, and Ethan talked about the road and Baines's office and the look on Gerald's face when Baines cut him off, and Ruth listened with the precise attention she always gave things, and Hector lay under the table across all three sets of feet, and the lamp burned warm on the table, and it was, Clara searched for the word and found it was too simple to be the right one, and too right to be anything else. It was home. She looked at that word the way you look at something unfamiliar that fits perfectly in your hand. She turned it over. She checked it from all sides. She decided she was going to keep it. Ruth left after dark, Martin coming to collect her with his own particular quiet that matched Ruth's energy the way good partnerships do. Clara walked her out to the wagon. "He's a good man," Ruth said low, so it was just between them. "I know," Clara said. "You going to be all right?" Ruth said. Not asking about the case, not asking about Pritchard. Asking about the other thing, the thing underneath all of it. Clara thought about that for a moment. "I think so," she said. "For the first time, I think that might actually be true." Ruth looked at her. "It is true," she said. "I've been watching you for 3 weeks. It's true." Clara pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in the yard in the dark. She had already used up her crying this week, and she had a limit, and she had reached it. "Thank you," she said, "for being here." "That's what we do out here," Ruth said. She climbed up to the wagon. "That's the whole thing, Clara. That's what it is." Martin clicked to the horse, and the wagon went down the approach road, and Clara stood and watched the lantern on its back until she couldn't see it anymore. She went back inside. Ethan was at the table with what was left of his coffee, looking at the stack of documents she had spread before they left the working copies, the notes, all of it. And she came and sat across from him and looked at what 3 weeks of work had built. "Baines is going to send his investigator for Pritchard's office records," she said. "Probably next week. If the pattern holds across other cases, the Garrett family, the others Ruth mentioned, it won't just be a new survey. It'll be his position." "He'll lose the commissionership," Ethan said. "Yes," she said. "That's what I think." Ethan was quiet. Then he said, "You thought about all of that on the road back." "Some of it," she said. "Some of it I thought about in Helena." "When did you sleep?" "Sufficiently," she said. He made the almost smile. She was beginning to understand that the almost smile was how Ethan laughed, the small version of it, and that the real laugh was rare enough to be significant, and she had gotten one real laugh out of him in 3 weeks, and she had been cataloging it. She reached over and gathered the document stack into a neat pile. She thought about her father's law books in the trunk in the bedroom. "I'm going to put some things on the shelf," she said. Ethan looked up. "In the morning," she said. I've been keeping things packed, in case." She paused. "I don't think I need to do that anymore." He looked at her for a long moment. His face was doing the still thing, the moved thing. "No," he said. "You don't." She nodded. She picked up the stack of documents. She would put them in order in the morning file, what needed filing, set aside what Baines's office would need when the investigator came. She would find a place for her father's books on the shelf below the window where the morning light came in from the east. She would make coffee, and it would be for a day that did not need to be survived, just lived. She was almost at the bedroom doorway when Ethan said her name. She turned. He was still at the table. His hat was on the peg. His coffee was cold. He looked like a man working up to something he had decided to say before he lost his nerve, which was interesting on a man she had categorized as someone who did not lose his nerve. "I'm glad you came," he said. "To Montana, to Copper Creek." He paused. "To this ranch." She stood in the doorway and looked at him, and felt everything she had not been naming all these weeks pressing at the edges of every careful category she had built. "So am I," she said. And then, because she was Clara Whitmore, and she had just won a case in a territorial commissioner's office, and she had 2,000 miles of survived behind her, and she could afford one true thing, more than I expected. He nodded once, slowly, the way he accepted all true things without making more of them than they were, and without making less. She went to her room. She did not bolt the door. She noticed that she had not bolted it 3 steps later, standing in the middle of the room in the lamplight. She stood there for a moment. She thought about going back to bolt it. Old reflex, old habit, old necessary thing. She sat down on the edge of the bed and took her boots off and set them side by side on the floor and lay back on top of the quilt and looked at the ceiling. The ranch settled into night around her, the creak of the house, the far sound of the creek behind the barn. Hector's nails on the floorboards in the main room, one circuit, then quiet. Ethan's boots moving to the other bedroom, the settle of his weight, then nothing. Silence that was not dangerous. For 11 months she had slept in silence that was not safe. And before that, for 3 years, she had slept in silence that was not silence at all, just the space between one bad moment and the next. This was different. She knew the difference now. She had learned what different felt like. She was going to let herself have it. She closed her eyes and did not listen for footsteps. She slept. The morning after she came home, Clara put her father's law books on the shelf. She did it before coffee, before Ethan was up, before the ranch had fully woken around her. She opened the trunk, lifted the books out with both hands no bracing of the right arm, and she noticed that. And she let herself notice it, and she carried them to the shelf below the east window, and set them down, and stood back and looked at them. 2 books. Cracked spines. Her father's handwriting in the margins small and precise. The hand of a man who had believed that words written in the right order could move the world toward something better. She had believed that too, once before Thomas. She had stopped believing it somewhere in the 2nd year of that marriage, when she had learned that the right words in the wrong room meant nothing, that law was only as good as the people willing to hold it. She believed it again now. She put her hand on the spine of the first book for a moment, the way you put your hand on the shoulder of someone you have been afraid of losing. Then she went to make coffee. Ethan came in 20 minutes later, saw the books on the shelf, and said nothing. He looked at them for one moment, then looked at her, and whatever he saw in her face made him nod once and go to pour his coffee. He understood she had come to learn the difference between a moment that needed words and a moment that needed to be let alone. He had been getting that right consistently enough that she had stopped being surprised by it and started being grateful for it in a quieter, steadier way. That was the first morning of what she was beginning to understand was simply her life. Commissioner Baines's investigator arrived in Copper Creek 9 days later. His name was Alderman, a compact man with a precise manner and a leather case that he kept close to his body, the way Clara kept her satchel, and he went directly to the county land office and spent 2 days in Fells's records room. Clara knew this because Ruth told her, and Ruth knew because Ruth Harper knew everything that happened in Copper Creek within approximately 4 hours of its happening. Fells looked like a man who'd swallowed something bad. Ruth reported sitting at Clara's kitchen table with her hands around a coffee cup. But he let Alderman in. He's not a brave man, but he knows which way the wind is turning. What about Pritchard? Clara asked. Pritchard hasn't been to his office in 3 days, Ruth said. Word is, he's been to see his cousin in Billings. She paused. Word from Billings is the cousin didn't want him. Clara looked at her cup. She felt something she examined carefully before she named it. It was not satisfaction exactly. It was closer to the feeling of a weight that has been set down the absence of something that had been there so long she had forgotten what the absence felt like. He's going to resign before Baines can remove him, she said. That's what Martin thinks, Ruth said. She was right. By the end of the week, a notice had been posted at the county seat. Silas Pritchard had stepped down from the county land commissioner position, citing personal reasons effective immediately. The territorial office in Helena had accepted the resignation and appointed a temporary replacement pending a formal election. Alderman had returned to Helena with 2 crates of records. Ethan read the notice in town and came home and told Clara, and she stood at the kitchen table and listened, and when he was done she said good, and went back to the document she was working on, which was a letter to Aldous Carey in Helena, thanking him for his assistance, and enclosing $20 she could not quite afford, and was sending anyway because her father had believed in paying debts, and she was her father's daughter. Ethan watched her write the letter. Clara, he said. It's done, he said. You can stop for a day. She looked up. He was standing at the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame, watching her with an expression she had been developing a better vocabulary for over the past weeks. It was the expression he wore when he was about to say something direct that he had been thinking about for longer than he would admit. I know it's done, she said. Do you? He said. Because you've been at that table since sunup. She put the pen down. She looked at her hands. Her right wrist ached faintly, the wrist she had injured in the fall, not the ribs. The wrist took longer sometimes, and she hadn't noticed until just now. I don't know what to do when there's nothing to build, she said. It came out more honest than she had intended. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Yes, you do, he said. You just haven't let yourself do it yet. She looked at him. "What do you think I should be doing?" "Living," he said, simply, like it was an obvious thing, like it was just the next word after everything that had come before. She looked at him for a long moment and felt the word land somewhere under her sternum and stay there. "The fence on the south pasture needs looking at," she said. He blinked. "That's not what I know what you meant," she said. "I'm saying I'd like to come with you, if you'll let me." She paused. "I want to see the land. My land. I want to walk the boundary." He looked at her for a moment, recalibrating, which was something he did rarely and quickly. Then he said, "Get your coat." They walked the boundary of the Calloway Ranch that afternoon, the two of them and Hector moving along the fence line from the south pasture east toward the creek. Clara walked with her hands in her coat pockets and her face into the November wind and felt the ground under her boots. The real ground, the actual land they had gone to Helena to save, and it was different from understanding it on paper. Paper gave you dimensions and legal descriptions and compass bearings. This gave you the smell of the sage and the sound of the creek getting louder as you moved east, and the way Hector ran ahead and came back and ran ahead again, as if he were personally responsible for showing her all of it. At the creek, Ethan stopped. "This is where the original marker was," he said. "The one Herschel helped me set." Clara stood at the creek and looked at the water. The creek was lower than it would be in spring, clear and cold over flat stones. 6 feet east of where they stood, the ground was different, slightly lower still, marked by the old course. You could see it if you knew what to look for, which she did now, having read Herschel's statement 8 times. "It shifted during the wet springs," she said. 73 and 74. "Herschel said 74 was the worst," Ethan said. "Creek rose 3 feet. When it went down somewhere else." Clara looked at the old course, at the current course, at the land between them that Pritchard had tried to claim using a fraudulent survey signed by a man whose license had been suspended. She thought about the Garrett boy who had ridden to Helena and fallen off his horse on the way back. She thought about the 3 families who had taken money and left. She thought about Herschel Doane sitting at his kitchen table with his old dog and his clear memory and waiting for years for somebody to ask him the right question. "We should make sure Baines knows about the Garrett family," she said. "If Alderman's investigation covers only the documents Pritchard filed in the land office, it may not reach the intimidation pattern." The Garrett boy. "Clara," Ethan said. She stopped. "The Garrett family is going to be all right," he said. "Baines knows. The valley knows. It's going to be looked at. But if no one formally—" "Clara." He said it the same way, quiet, not cutting her off, but making her hear him. "You can't fix all of it today." She looked at the creek. "I know," she said. "You fixed what you could fix," he said. "That's not nothing. That's a great deal." She pressed her lips together. The wind came off the range, cold and steady, and she turned her face into it and thought about what it meant to stop, how strange that felt. How the habit of emergency was hard to unlearn when emergency had been her normal for so long. "I'm going to write the letter about the Garrett family when we get back," she said. She felt him decide not to argue with that. "All right," he said. They stood at the creek for a while longer. Hector waded in up to his knees and then appeared to reconsider, and came out and shook himself on both of them, which broke the moment in the particular way that only a large wet dog can break a moment. And Clara made a sound that was entirely a laugh, real and sudden, and Ethan said, "Hector, damn it!" with no real heat, and they walked back toward the house with the dog between them and the afternoon light going orange off the ranch buildings ahead. It was the first time she had laughed outside, she realized. All her laughing had been in the kitchen at the table contained. This was bigger. This was out in the open. She filed that too. The letter she wrote about the Garrett family was 4 pages long and cited 3 specific statutory provisions, and she sent it to Aldous Carey to forward to Baines's office because she trusted Aldous to put it in the right hands. Ethan read it before she sealed it and said, "It's good." And she had learned enough about him by now to know that he did not say things were good unless he meant it. December came in cold and hard, the first real snow hitting the valley in the second week, and Clara learned what winter in Montana meant with the particular totality of learning that came from being inside it rather than reading about it. It meant more time indoors, which meant more time at the kitchen table, which meant more evenings across from Ethan with the lamp burning between them and the snow against the windows, and Hector producing quantities of warmth from the hearth that were frankly outsized for his actual size. She had expected the confinement to feel like confinement. She had lived inside Thomas's house, and the walls had always been close and getting closer. She had attributed that to the marriage and not to the walls, but she had not been entirely certain until now, sitting inside Ethan's house in December snow and feeling not closed in. Not at all. The walls were the same dimensions as any other walls. The difference was what was inside them. She was inside them. By choice. With a bolt, she no longer bolted. One evening in the third week of December, she was reading her father's second law book, the one on contract law, because she was thinking about something Baines had mentioned in a wire regarding the formal survey commission that was being established for the territory, and she had a notion she was not ready to say aloud yet, when Ethan looked up from the harness he was mending and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," she said. "When you went to the agency," he said. "The matrimonial agency. You said you needed to survive. I understand that." He turned the harness in his hands. "But you could have gone to Philadelphia, other cities. You had Aldous Carey and Helena. You didn't have to do this." She looked at her book. "Aldous is a friend," she said. "Not that kind of resource. And Philadelphia," she paused. Philadelphia was where Gerald was, where Thomas's family was, where everyone who knew me as Thomas Whitmore's wife. She was quiet for a moment. "I needed to go somewhere no one had a story about me yet. Somewhere I could be whoever I actually was, before Thomas." "Who were you before Thomas?" Ethan asked. She thought about it. She gave it the time it deserved. "My father's daughter," she said. "Someone who read law for pleasure and argued with county surveyors at 12 years old. Someone who believed that words written in the right order could change things." She paused. "Someone who wasn't afraid all the time." Ethan set the harness down. He looked at her directly. "Are you afraid now?" She considered that honestly. "Not all the time," she said. "Less every day." He nodded. "Good," he said. He picked the harness back up. She went back to her book, and neither of them said anything else for a while. And it was the most comfortable silence she had ever sat inside of, and she knew it, and let herself know it. The wire from Baines's office came on the 22nd of December, and it was not what she had expected, which was becoming a pattern with things she had not let herself hope for. It was not about the Garrett family, though a second wire arrived the same day, confirming that Aldous had submitted her letter, and it had been received and noted. The first wire was about the Survey Commission. The formal language was official and dry, and underneath it was the thing it actually said, which was this Commissioner Baines was establishing a territorial survey review board. He was looking for qualified persons to review disputed surveys submitted for territorial arbitration. The position was appointed, not elected. It paid a modest annual sum. It required documented knowledge of land law and survey practice. He was asking if Clara Whitmore Calloway was interested. She read the wire 3 times. She set it on the table. She looked at her father's law books on the shelf. She looked at Ethan. He had read it over her shoulder. She had not minded. She had stopped minding that kind of closeness a while ago without marking the exact moment which told her something, and he was looking at the wire, and then at her, and his face was doing the still thing, the deeply moved thing, and he was very carefully not saying anything, so that she could have the moment to herself. "He's offering me a position," she said, because she needed to say it aloud to make it real. "He is," Ethan said. "A legal appointment," she said. "Territorial." "Yes." She pressed the wire flat on the table with both hands. "My name," she said. He used my name, Clara Whitmore Calloway. It's in writing, in a territorial document. She heard the thing in her own voice when she said it, the thing she had not let herself show, very often the part that was not the attorney's daughter managing a case, but just a woman who had been called guilty and dangerous, and something to be silenced for 11 months by a family with money and a grudge, and who was now being addressed by a territorial official as a qualified person whose knowledge was worth something, whose name was worth something. Ethan put his hand over hers on the table. He did not say anything. He did not make it into a speech or a pronouncement. He just put his hand over hers, warm and steady, and left it there. She looked at his hand on hers. She had not let anyone touch her hands in a long time. Thomas had grabbed them. Gerald had never touched her at all. She had kept her hands to herself as a matter of self-preservation. But Ethan's hand over hers felt like none of those things. It felt like what she imagined a shore felt like to someone who had been swimming for a very long time. "I'm going to write back today," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm going to say yes." "I know that too," he said. She turned her hand over under his and held on just for a moment. He let her. He held back steady and unhurried the way he did everything. She let go. She picked up her pen. She started writing. Christmas came 4 days later, and Ruth and Martin came to the ranch for supper, and Herschel Doane came too, driven out from his small house by Ruth, in a wagon with more blankets than any man of 81 strictly needed, and they ate at Ethan's table with the lamp burning high and the snow against the windows, and Hector under the table being optimistic about everyone's plates. Herschel, who did not make small talk, looked at Clara across the table at some point in the evening and said, "Your father would be pleased." Clara looked at him. She had told no one at that table about her father, in those specific terms, his work, what it had meant, what she had lost when she lost him. Herschel had known, she realized from the first day, from the books he had seen on the shelf when he came to the ranch 2 weeks after the Helena trip. The cracked spines and the marginal notes that were obviously not hers. "How do you know about my father?" she said. "Ruth talks," Herschel said. "And you read law like someone who was taught to love it, not just use it. Those aren't the same thing." He picked up his fork. "He'd be pleased. That's all I'm saying." Clara looked at the table. She looked at the lamp. She looked at the people around it. Ruth arguing cheerfully with Martin about the correct way to store root vegetables. Ethan listening to Herschel with the particular attention he gave to people who had been in the world longer than most. Hector managing to look simultaneously asleep and alert to the possibility of dropped food. She thought about her father sitting in the parlor in Philadelphia, with his law books open on his knees, telling her that the law was just the best arrangement of words human beings had managed so far for getting each other to do right, and that it mattered who did the arranging, and who did the reading, and who stood up in the room and said, "This is what it actually says." She had stood up in that room. She was going to keep standing up in rooms. She picked up her fork and ate Christmas supper at a table that was hers, in a house that was hers, in a valley that had her name in its official record now, and she let it be what it was without hedging it, or qualifying it, or holding it at a distance in case it was taken from her. January brought the official letter from Baines's office confirming her appointment to the Survey Review Board. It came in an envelope with the territorial seal. Her name on the outside was Clara Whitmore Calloway, Copper Creek, Montana Territory. She opened it at the kitchen table while Ethan was out, and she read it, and then she went to the shelf and put her hand on her father's law books and stood there for a moment. She did not cry. She had cried the right amount in this story already. She felt something that was not relief and not triumph and not gratitude, or not only any of those things. It was the feeling of a person who has traveled a very long way by a very hard road and arrived at a place where they can set their bag down and not pick it up again in the morning. The feeling of, "I am here. This is real. I have made it to something." She made coffee and sat down at the table and started preparing for her first case review. February. Clara's ribs were fully healed. She knew because she reached for the top shelf one morning without thinking about it. The shelf Ethan had emptied for her in the first week that she had never asked him to refill. And there was no pain. Not a trace of it. She stood with her arm raised and her hand on the shelf and stayed there for a moment just to be certain. Gone. 3 months and a new life later, entirely gone. She lowered her arm. She stood in the kitchen, and the morning light came in through the east window across her father's law books, and she thought about what it meant for something to heal. She had thought healing was a long, slow process that you didn't notice while it was happening. That had been true of the ribs. She was not sure it was true of everything else. She thought she had noticed the rest of it carefully and exactly and chosen to let it happen. That was different from the ribs. That took something the ribs hadn't needed. Ethan came in from morning chores and found her standing in the middle of the kitchen. "You all right?" he said. "My ribs are healed," she said. He looked at her. He understood she could see it that this was not a simple medical report. "Good," he said. "I reached for the high shelf," she said. "The one I emptied for you." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "You can put things back up there if you want," he said. "Or I can restock it. However you'd like to arrange it." She looked at him. "It's your kitchen," she said. "Clara," he said with a patience that was gentle and very final. "It has not been only my kitchen for 4 months. You know that." She looked at the shelf. She thought about arrangement, about what it meant to organize a shared space, to decide together what went where, to negotiate the small daily logistics of a life that had more than one person in it. She had done that in Thomas's house, had done it carefully, strategically, always trying to predict which arrangement would produce the least conflict. This was not that. "I'll think about it," she said. "Good," he said. He went to pour his coffee. He handed her a cup without being asked. She took it and thought about the high shelf and the low shelf and all the rearranging that had happened in this kitchen in 4 months and what it added up to. It added up to this: she was still here. She was here by choice. She was here because she had built something and fought for it and won, and decided to stay inside the victory instead of looking for the next emergency. She was here because a man had given her a bolt on a door and rearranged his shelves without being asked and said, "Follow your lead," and meant it every time, and had not once in 4 months given her reason to measure the distance to the nearest exit. She sat at the table. He sat across from her. They drank their coffee in the morning quiet that was not silence, not the dangerous kind, just the ordinary, companionable nothing, said of two people who had been through things together and come out on the same side. After a while, Ethan said, "The new survey markers come in this week. Baines's commission is sending someone to reset the east boundary." "I want to be there when they set it," Clara said. "I know," he said. "I want my name on the record as present," she said, "as a witness." "I'll make sure of it," he said. She nodded. She looked at her coffee cup. She looked at the shelf with her father's books. She looked at the east window where the February light was coming in thin and cold and entirely honest. She thought about what it had taken to get to this kitchen this morning, this cup of coffee, and this silence, and this man across from her who had asked one question: "How long have you carried this alone?" and had not looked away from the answer. She thought about the stagecoach, and the 3 steps down, and the arm she had pressed against her ribs, and the way she had held her face still when the pain went white at the edges. She thought about 11 days of traveling with 1 trunk and 2 law books, and a physician's record folded in the lining, and enough fear to last a lifetime, and enough of her father's stubborn precision to outlast the fear. She thought about Gerald Whitmore's face in that office when he understood she had already answered every argument he had come to make. She thought about the wire with the territorial seal, and her name on the outside, all 3 names, Clara Whitmore Calloway. As if the territory itself had looked at her history and decided all of it belonged to her, even the parts that had been meant to break her. She thought about Ruth's hand over hers, and Herschel's voice saying your father would be pleased, and Ethan's hand on hers at the kitchen table the day the commissioner's wire came. She thought about the door she had not bolted. She thought about all the ways a person could be saved, and how none of the ones that had mattered had been dramatic. No one had ridden in on a white horse. No one had fought a villain in the street. The things that had saved her were a bolt on a door installed before she arrived, shelves rearranged in the night, a cup of coffee made without being asked, a question asked without flinching. "How long have you carried this alone?" That was what rescue looked like when it was real. Not someone arriving to fight your battles, but someone standing beside you while you fought them, steady and present, and completely sure of you, and afterward saying simply, "I know. You did it anyway. That's the whole of it." Ethan put his coffee cup down. He looked at her across the table. "Clara," he said. "Yes," she said. "I'm glad you're here," he said. Not the way he had said it in Helena, which had been about the journey and the arriving. This was about now. About the kitchen and the coffee and the February light, and the 4 months of daily evidence they had been building toward this morning. She looked at him, and felt the thing she had been not naming expand fully in her chest, warm and permanent, not frightening anymore. She had stopped being afraid of it somewhere between the creek boundary and the Christmas table, and the night she did not bolt the door. She did not know the exact moment. It had not announced itself. It had simply become true, the way the best things did gradually and then completely. "I know," she said. "I am too." Outside, the February wind moved across the ranch, and the creek behind the barn ran under a thin skin of ice, and the survey marker would go in at the east boundary before the week was out, with Clara's name in the record as witness. Somewhere in Helena, a territorial file had her full name on it, and her father's profession noted beside it, and her appointment confirmed in the governor's seal. Somewhere in Philadelphia, Gerald Whitmore had gone back to a city where Clara was no longer a problem to be managed, because Clara was no longer someone who could be managed by men like Gerald, and he had learned that in a commissioner's office with no good answer left. And here in a kitchen in Montana, a woman who had arrived with 3 broken ribs and 1 trunk, and enough fear to last 10 lifetimes, sat across from a man who had given her safety before he asked for trust. And she had given him trust before she could name what she felt, and what she felt now was something so steady and so complete that it did not need a dramatic declaration, or a grand gesture, or any word she hadn't already earned the right to say. She was not Ethan Calloway's burden. She had never been his burden. She had been from the first morning at the kitchen table, with the survey documents between them, his equal. His partner. The person who read what others missed, and stood up in rooms, and said this is what it actually says, and meant every word. She had arrived believing she was running from something. She had discovered in 4 months of Montana winter and land law and coffee at the same table that she had been running toward something all along, toward the woman she had been before. Fear taught her to be smaller, toward the work that made her feel like her father's daughter, toward a man who saw all of it, the broken parts and the sharp parts and the fierce parts, and did not flinch and did not leave. What saved Clara Whitmore was not a rescue. It was recognition. A good man looking at everything she was, everything she had survived, every scar she carried, and saying without condition and without fear, "I see you. I believe you. And I am not going anywhere." And she who had learned to believe almost nothing believed him,